Everyone, welcome to week 9 titled Policy Suggestions, Human Rights and the Future of Policing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your midterm report that you just completed this week or last week rather. I'm going to talk a little bit about your final report. Some of you said, a couple of you said anyway, that you want a little more structure on it. And so I wanted to call attention the Human Rights Policing Final Report, where I give you the exact structure and guidelines that's expected of you for the final paper, the final report. That's been on Canvas since the beginning of the semester. And I'm going to talk more about it next week, but I'll at least introduce it today, and then you can look over it, and then we can I'll go more in depth with it when I send out a video Monday or Tuesday of next week. And then I'll talk to you about our readings for this week and the discussion board for this week, week 9. So most of you did very well in your midterm progress report. If you haven't noticed, everything that we do in class is really to get you thinking about your community engaged your human rights policing community engaged projects and about how we can transform policing from mainly a social control institution to a human rights organization, specifically as it applies to the community organization and the community members that they represent for your project. And so your midterm progress report, the first part was all about your formal progress regarding your community engaged projects, where I ask you to discuss community organizations or people involved in your community engagement. Who are they? Why are their voices relevant? What are their goals of the organization? What is their history, especially in lacrosse? Have they achieved their goals? What are your reasons for choosing this community organization for this community engaged project, and other types of relevant information? All this is going to go into your final report as well. And so it's good that you're starting to think about that and write about that right now. So this midterm progress report, a lot of that will go into your final report. So hopefully this provided you with the structure and the guideline needed to get to that final report. And so that's how this progress report was structured to help you with that. 2, discuss your strategy for gaining access to this community organization members. How did you succeed in this strategy? As I've said over and over, just sending emails isn't good enough. You want to go over there, talk to people, introduce yourself, say that you're a scholar at UWL and that you're doing a community engaged project regarding for a human rights policing class, and you want to know how police can better apply human rights from the perspective of the community organization, and how police can serve as a valuable resource to help that community organization and the people that they represent. And of course, in the end, you're going to be writing a policy analysis. 3, provide an example of your interview outline. Obviously, I gave you a structure for your interview guidelines. Many of you used it, and those of you that did use it, developing, having 3 or 4 themes and then sample questions from within those themes is the semi-structured kind of interview that I think is very successful for qualitative studies like this. It's what I do as a ethnographer in sociology and criminology and criminal justice. And so that interview guideline is something that I kind of created on my own. I realized that, hey, this is kind of what I do when I go out and conduct research. And so I thought it'd be useful for students if I kind of gave a protocol or my research guidelines on how to conduct interviews. And so those of you that used it, I think performed very well in those initial interviews. And so you want to go back and talk to more members of the community organization. You want to find out if those themes remain relevant, and you want to add data to those themes by asking questions to members of the community organization. You want to see if there's any new or emergent themes, or if the themes that you currently have are no longer useful, that in other words, are not so important, but that there's another theme that might be important. And you also want to validate. So if you have a first or second interview, you want to validate if the information that you found in the first or second interview might apply to a third interview, if they add something new or if they don't. Generally speaking, when doing research in the social sciences, when you don't find any new information, it's when you know you're done with the research process, where it keeps on getting redundant and redundant. Otherwise, you want to keep on finding out, well, do other people hold these same views? Do people hold different views? Why or why not? And so that's why it's important to have a second and a third and perhaps even a fourth interview with members of the community organization. So the fourth question within part one, discuss your strategy moving forward with your community engaged projects, including developing new themes and building on existing themes. What are your key findings and thoughts so far? So you want to keep on writing this down every time you go and you talk to someone. If you look at my interview guidelines, there's space there for reflection, thoughts, comments, key findings. And so this is the type of structure that you want to use when doing this community engaged project. And then what are exactly your next steps and issues that you want to explore? For the most part, most of you are doing very well. You're right on target. You're doing a very good job. And so keep up the good work. I gave extensive feedback and comments to each one of you and that progress report. So follow those comments, follow that feedback, and I think you'll be just fine. If there's anything glaring or if there was any type of problem, I discussed that personally to you in the feedback. If I didn't have any major problems or anything, just some suggestions, comments, a few little guidelines, you're doing very well. Keep on moving forward at your progress. It's looking good. And then I had part two, short essay. One was to elaborate what you think are the most important human rights from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, and then the first 27 articles of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. And so many of you had some very insightful comments there, which I appreciated. It also gets you continuing to think about human rights and policing, specifically as it applies to your community organization that you're analyzing this semester for this project. So very well, most of you did pretty good on that and appreciate it. Prompt two was, do you believe in the potential of human rights policing? Do you think we can transform policing from an institution of social control to human rights organization? And again, many of you had some pretty good insights there, which I appreciated, and made some comments there as well. And I also talked about if you had absolute power, how would you reform or improve policing in the United States? What policies would you instill to make the desired changes happen? And I put that prompt in there because, again, towards the end of this paper, you're going to be, towards the end of this semester, your final report is going to include a policy analysis regarding human rights and policing, specifically as it applies to the community organization for your community engaged project. And so hopefully you're starting to think now about policy. As you conduct these interviews, as you talk to community organizations, you can start to think about, well, all of these themes, how do all of these themes that I'm developing lead to a policy analysis? And then part three wasn't really great, but I asked you kind of what your thoughts in the class, and most of you pretty much like the structure. You also like the flexibility. You like to be on autopilot, to have the freedom to kind of conduct your own research the way you see fit, but you also appreciated the kind of the guidance that I've given you throughout the semester. Many of you appreciated the interview guidelines that I gave, and those of you that checked out the final report guidelines have used that as well to kind of structure and guide your project. Some of you may not have seen that yet, but like I said, I'll talk about that next week. So let me move over then to your human rights final policing report. Again, that's on Canvas, where I give you the exact structure and all the parts and components of that final paper. I'm going to talk about it in depth next week, but this week you can kind of look over that. Obviously this isn't middle school anymore. You're not grade school students or high school students. This is a university. And so at a university, students are expected to conduct independent research, to use their own creativity. It's not my job to tell you what to do and how to do it. Again, this isn't grade school anymore. You're university students. I treat you all like my equals. And although I have a lot of extensive experience conducting research and publishing books and articles and things of that nature. The way I learned how to write books and conduct research and publish articles was really being on autopilot, doing trial and error, trying to figure things out on my own. And then get guidance from my professors and mentors as I was going through. And so that's the same logic that I give towards you. Let you go out there, make some mistakes, but also learn from trial and error, and to go out there with the freedom to conduct your own project the way that you see fit, while also giving you some guidelines to help navigate you through. And so I try not to give too much of a grip and too much trap you too much into a rubric, but I also try to navigate that and give you guidelines and suggestions all the way through. The smartest university students, advocate for themselves. If they need any guidance, they reach out to their professors. And so, of course, if there's any further structure or further guidelines that you need, obviously use your words. Send me an email, meet with me, schedule a time to meet with me, etc. And I can give you further guidelines. But I think for the most part, the vast majority of you have really appreciated the type of structure that you have, the guidance that you have, and you're well on your way to conducting a promising final project and a policy analysis. So I appreciate that. So your human rights policing final report will include an abstract, an introduction with the basic elements of any introduction, which I'll go, again, all of this I'm going to go into more next week. You'll have a discussion in your community organization. Many of you already did that for your midterm progress reports, brief role of the researcher, where you talk about what's your relationship to the people and what's your interest in the topic. Then you'll talk about your method section, things like how you collected data, the themes that you organized, the kind of questions you asked. 5, your findings and major takeaways, where you revisit those 3 to 4 themes or so. And you talk about what's most important, how did you arrive at those themes, and what's most important, what does that say about your community organization? And then your final part is policy recommendations. So look over that, and I'm going to go over that next week and go into more specific details about that, but it's all written there for you. I'm just going to explain it even more for you next week, and I've already put it on a PowerPoint for this week, and so you can check out the PowerPoint for this week, and I'm using the PowerPoint as I talk here. Okay, so far so good. Okay, so for this week you have readings. Let me look here at my introduction. Yep. Okay. So this week you have, we're talking about kindness versus human rights, the blasé attitude, and community-based research informing policing policies. And so I have you reading chapter 6 of the human rights policing. You have the introduction, make sure you read that. Then I have chapter summaries, and then I have written something on kindness, and then the blasé attitude. And my father adds something about developing the blasé attitude, notes from the NOPD. And that was one of his first assignments that I'll talk about in a minute. And then some policy suggestions. And that's basically what your discussion post will be based on. And then I offer final thoughts and ideas of future policing and human rights. And so that's chapter 6 here, policy, suggestions, human rights. So introduction does what it normally does. I have kindness here, where I even talk about a definition of kindness. And I start off, to police, being a good cop means following the law. To community members, good cops treat people with dignity and respect. In short, kindness. While both remain important, both meanings of good cops fall well short of the goals of human rights policing. In other words, it's not good just to be kind, right? You can be kind to people while you arrest them and put them in jail. People would rather you be rude and allow them to have their freedom, right? Instead of be kind to them while putting them in jail. I'll take my freedom over your kindness any day of the week. And so I'm sure there were kind people, during the Holocaust, but I bet that the Jewish people and the Romas and others would have preferred rude people and, not gone into the gas chambers. And so being kind is simply not good enough for human rights policing. Giving people dignity is not good enough for human rights policing. Rather, what's good enough for human rights policing is exactly those 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, those articles in the Declaration of Human Rights. That's what people want. People want their human rights, not people to be kind to them or just simply give them dignity. They want their human rights. And that's how we want our police to be protectors of people who can enjoy the human rights that naturally belong to them. And so make sure you check out that chapter where I really explain and elaborate on this idea. And then I'll talk about the blasé attitude. And really that came to me when I was living in New York City. I was teaching at a jail in Brooklyn. I was attending graduate school in my doctorate program in Greenwich Village at the New School for Social Research. I was writing my dissertation, conducting research for my dissertation in a Brooklyn Pentecostal tongue-speaking church with Afro-Caribbean members. And I was also serving as a part-time professor, an adjunct professor at CUNY, City University of New York, specifically John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I was quite busy. And New York, you can imagine all the external stimuli that you constantly receive. It's a action-packed place. People from every different religion, every different culture, every different language, every different country is all there. It's hectic, it's booming. It's kind of stuff I love personally. But nonetheless, you're so saturated with all this external stimuli, you kind of just cancel it out. And I remember one day I was walking, heading over to class. I was about to jump on a train from Brooklyn to Manhattan to go to one of my night classes. And I saw this kid, 16 or something, get hit by a car and get mangled. She died. I was looking at her dead body. And I remember almost being unfazed and just continue to walk like nothing happened. And it wasn't until a day or two later that I realized that I had seen something tragic. I saw a human being, an innocent human being, get hit by this car and mangled up in a really brutal way. Hard to see. And it didn't even faze me even a little bit. And I thought, what am I, a horrible person? Am I an awful person? Then I was reminded of George Zimmel's concept of the blasé attitude. That when people, city dwellers, especially in big cities like New York or Los Angeles, they're overcome with all this external stimuli all the time, that they develop a self-protective organism within them to protect them from all this external stimuli, and it comes off as indifference or as having an attitude of being blasé. But it really is just to kind of protect yourself from the onslaught of external stimuli that you constantly receive in New York. So you see tragic things, and you just are able to, like water off a duck's back. If something like that were to happen in La Crosse, people would be talking about it for years. A small town like this. And so, so I remember how I developed this kind of blasé attitude, and it made me realize how I was able to kind of block emotionally tragic things around me so I could just go on with my life. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to. Most New Yorkers wouldn't. So it's not that we're rude in New York. It's just that we have this kind of internal self-protective organism because of this onslaught of external stimuli. And this kind of protects us. And I think this happens a lot with police who see every day 30 or 40 instances, especially in big city police in LA, New York, places like that, where they take 30 or 40 different calls for service, and every single call is some type of trauma happening or some type of drama happening. So they're constantly filled with this external stimuli. My father gives a story of his first day on the job, his very first day on the job. Man can barely speak any English at this point still. First day on the job, he goes on a call, person's been shot, and my father sees the man who was shot, and he arrives at the scene, sees the man that was shot, goes on the floor, on the ground, picks up his head and says, "Hey man, who did this to you, man? Who did this to you?" And the guy, bleeding out, says, "No, man, don't worry, I'm gonna get him." And my father looks at him and says, "No, man, I don't think you're gonna make it." And then the guy dies right there in my father's arms. His first call of service as a cop. And he's sitting there traumatized, And his partner, who had a few years on the job already, said, "Hey, Marina, what are you, some type of wimp? Let's go. We got another call for service. Let's go. Let's get out of here." And so you can see how that blasé attitude starts to develop. And so I argue that one of the biggest threats to human rights policing is when police develop this blasé attitude. For them, it's just another drama among many others. But for the person experiencing it, that's everything, whether they've been assaulted or they've been robbed. This was a very tragic event in someone's life where their human rights really need to be protected. And that's when police need to be there on top of that, not that blasé attitude. So here I warn police officers not to develop that blasé attitude that is so easy for many of us to develop inside law enforcement and outside law enforcement if you're from a big city. And so that's that story my father writes in developing the blasé attitude, notes from the NOPD, the New Orleans Police Department. And then I have policy analysis at the, and this is what I'm going to ask you to talk about in your discussion board. On page 108, the general policy changes at a national level, and these are the things that I've proposed: end the forever wars, and international military bases, and mass violence against the earth. And I argue that we should end mass violence not only against the earth, but also against non-human animals as well. As we have seen a holocaust for animals that occur every single day. And if you look at even at most religious beliefs, if you look at most ideas, if you look at a lot of Jewish intellectual scholars, they would argue that, for those of us who can see a slaughterhouse and say there are only animals, that we are the ones that are Nazis. And that's straight from Horkheimer and Adorno, the Jewish intellectuals from the Frankfurt School in Germany. And also, if you look at even Christian teachings and from theologians, they would argue that cruelty to animals begets cruelty to humans. And so if we can be evil towards animals, it just makes it so much easier for us to be evil to human beings. As a matter of fact, Plato's hierarchy argues that first Greek men, then non-Greek men, then women, then slaves, then animals. And so anybody who's on top can do whatever cruelty they want to the person, to the group who's immediately below them. And so many of us follow this type of hierarchy. And so radical intellectual scholarship would argue that we need to end this type of hierarchy that justifies the type of cruelty that we engage with each other, with animals, and with our brothers and sisters around the world. And so that's why I say end mass violence against the earth, and the extermination of the rainforest, and the fracking and the drilling and the destroying of our wetlands, and the cruelty against the earth that's jeopardizing human civilization, and end this cruelty against non-human animals in this meat and dairy industry that creates the Holocaust every single day. For conscious sentient beings. End the war on drugs and decriminalize all drugs. There's no reason why anybody should be in jail, locked, languishing in cages simply for drug use. Drug addiction should have always been treated as a mental health issue and never a criminal issue. And the only reason why it was ever considered a criminal issue is because putting people in prison is profitable. That's why. And that is the only reason. It has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with keeping us safe. It has nothing to do with any of the reasons that they tell us. And so we have to decriminalize all drugs and take police out of that completely. We have to end for-profit prisons, just like we should end for-profit healthcare as well. Having for-profit prisons is completely it's absurd. It should never exist, but it's part of this neoliberal economic policy that has devastated countries around the world today. We need to abolish the prison industrial complex. The only people that should be separated from society are those people that pose an imminent threat to society. And unfortunately, those people are more of our political and economic elites that are true thugs and true criminals and true terrorists that account for the vast majority of violent and financial crime in the United States, way more than all the street crime combined. And so end and abolish the prison industrial complex in the United States. We should also abolish the death penalty. The state should not be responsible for murdering people. If we don't want people to be murderous and killing, maybe the government shouldn't do it either. Which, of course, and the military-industrial complex, again, and the forever wars, as I said, the first one, including all of our international military bases. We need to have universal health care and Medicaid for all people. That is a human right. Healthcare is a human right, and people, regardless of how much money they make for their bosses, for their masters, for their rulers, or their employers, no matter how much money they make or don't make, everyone deserves universal healthcare. I want your parents and your grandparents to have universal health care no matter how much money they made in their life, because they are my brothers and sisters. And hopefully you want the same thing for my parents and my grandparents as well, because they're your brothers and sisters. It's part of the social contract that we all are entitled to human health care. And homelessness. And as I argue, homelessness plus vacant housing equals society fails. That was actually a graffiti that was painted right next to my brother's house in New Orleans. And so we can end homelessness in a heartbeat, in 1 second, just a fraction of the money that we give to having the Ukrainians killed in a suicidal mission. Only a part of that money can actually end homelessness in the United States. It is the easiest social problem in the world to solve, and it would benefit all of us equally. And of course, a $20 minimum wage. If people had, a $20 minimum wage, universal health care, and we decriminalized all drugs, our prison population would almost be nothing. Maybe except for those political and economic elites that are responsible for most of the crimes of the world. And welfare for the rich and tax the rich. That's obvious. And I even put in one of my chapters how the wealthiest Americans pay zero taxes. And the top 3 richest Americans that have more money than the bottom 50% of all Americans pay zero taxes every year. The burden of paying for society and paying for the infrastructure and paying for all of our terrorist, murderous wars abroad, all of those things we pay for, not the rich that benefits off of all of that. And so tax the rich and end welfare for the rich. The vast majority of welfare does not go into the pockets of poor people. The vast majority of welfare, the real welfare queens in our society, are those people that wear coats and ties and suits. Those are the real welfare queens that do no work and yet get our hard-earned tax money through subsidies. And so we need to end welfare for the rich and make them responsible for paying their share of our society. We need to end Citizens United, perhaps one of the most corrupt and criminal policies ever passed in the history of the United States, where corporations are allowed to pay off politicians. In most countries in the world, if they had Citizens United, the people would simply go and overthrow their government because they would know that that government is evil and is corrupt to the core. Yet those criminal policies are passed and made legal in the United States in an act of complete absurdity, which was the death knell of American democracy. And so we need to end Citizens United. Look it up if you don't know what Citizens United is. And we need to end corporate lobbying, which is another form of criminal bribery of our politicians. Princeton study just came out that argued quite convincingly that 90% of Americans, all of us just about, have zero say-so in who gets elected into office and what are and public policy. Zero say-so in public policy. The decisions that impact our community, our state, our government, our country, and our history, we have no say-so in it. Only the political and economic elite have any say-so in the rules that we have to follow and the direction that we must move in history, where the American people have been rendered impotent to shape any of the affairs that affect their families, their communities, or their country. So we need to end that. We need to end corporate influence on social policy. Corporations now control every institution, especially our political and economic institutions, destroying any possibility of true economic competition and any real democracy in our political institutions. So we have to destroy corporations and end their influence in our lives, and their influence in our government, and end their influence in all of our institutions. We also need national support for labor unions. Americans fought long and hard, especially in the state of Wisconsin, for the right of workers to peaceably assemble, to organize, and to decide what are their class interests and to move those interests forward. Well, it's legal for the rich to do it. The wealthy, powerful elite, they organize all the time. They assemble, they discuss their class interests, and then they act to carry out those interests all the time. So if rich people can do it, why can't the working people do it? People like you and I. So we need national support for labor unions, and we need to create a third major party. Both political parties in the United States, the Republican and Democratic Party, they've been paid off by the corporate elite. They no longer serve the interests of the American people. They only serve the corporate oligarchy to which they are a part, and we need them gone. We need to create a third party because the two political parties, the Republican and Democratic Party in the United States, abandoned the American people. They no longer serve the interests of the American people, and they are part of waging class warfare against the American people. And so we need to create a third party that actually represents the American people. So that was my general policy suggestions in the United States. And then I go on to explain in the book, Human Rights Policing, policy changes for policing. So I actually argue to increase funding for the police, to have higher standards for hiring and promotion. And I'll lay out each of these within each section. I argue for community-directed policing. It's not the police that should be telling the community how they want to be policed. Rather, it's the community that dictates to the police how they want to be policed, not the other way around. The community decides how they want to be policed. And that's part of your human rights community-engaged projects, for you to tell us how that community organization and the people that they represent, how they want to be policed, not how the police want to police them. And so that's very important. Standard training, my next policy change for policing. These are my policy recommendations. Standard training in human rights. All police should have training in human rights policing. We need to also have a civilian community oversight board. We need to limit asset forfeiture. Check out that section so you can learn more about what asset forfeiture is. We're going to have a discussion on that in the next couple of weeks. We're going to talk about asset forfeiture and what a problem that is in this country and how that needs to be either limited or completely taken away. We need to end the war on drugs and decriminalize all drugs. I said that before, but I wanted to reiterate the importance of that. We need to limit no-knock warrants. No-knock warrants should only be used in cases of hostages and when life is at serious threat. Obviously, it should never be used for drug raids, since all drugs should and must be decriminalized, as well as the abolition of the prison industrial complex. So we need to limit no-knock warrants. We need to limit qualified immunity that gives police carte blanche to do whatever they want without any type of recourses or responsibilities when they violate people's human rights and their civil rights. So we need to limit that qualified immunity. We should eliminate police from traffic enforcement. The idea of police hiding behind the bushes to jump on their prey. This is something that criminals do. We shouldn't have our police acting like criminals, hiding behind bushes, waiting for the prey to come in and then jumping on their prey. That is not something we want police doing. All that does is create distrust between police and the community. And when some person wants to take my money away, wants to take food away from my household, I have a problem with that person. That person is my enemy. And so we should not have police doing this. We need to lessen the burden on police officers and eliminate non-criminal calls for service. Police can be there in the background, but we need social workers. We need trained health professionals. These are the people that should be answering most calls for service, especially when no crime has been committed. And so for non-criminal offenses, we need other people responding to calls for service, not police. That only endangers everybody around. Once you introduce a gun into the picture, there's now a chance that somebody's going to die. We need to demilitarize. Oh, before that, yeah, we need to demilitarize most police. If you look at pictures of the police from the 1970s, walking the beat, they look like normal people. Now they look like they're a hostile alien force entering into our communities. They look like an occupying army is what they look like. And this does not foster trust between community members and police. Police need to be demilitarized. Only a small amount of police should be militarized, again, in the cases of a hostage-like situation. Otherwise, police do not need all of that armor like an occupying military force out to engage in hostile acts against the population. We do not need that, and that does not make life better for police or for us or anyone. We need to significantly reduce police from making arrests at schools. Rather, the police in schools should be there to protect the human rights of community members, or in this particular case, of students, especially against teachers that want to call the cops on students or anybody else that wants students or young people to enter the juvenile injustice system in the United States. We need human rights police officers protecting the human rights of students, not the other way around. We should not be putting kids in cages. If you want to create violent, aggressive adults, put them in jail as kids and see what happens. You'll be successful. So we need to end putting kids in cages, period. So decriminalize kids. And finally, we need to reallocate resources within the community, resources that provide human rights to community members, especially the most vulnerable community members in our society, and police can be a helping hand. So in this discussion board for this week, I have you commenting, picking one, if you want to comment on each of the general policy changes at the national level to make your argument, and or you can pick policing changes, policy changes for policing, and you can give your critique and feedback on each one of those as well. And so hopefully this will be an intellectually stimulating discussion board. I write all these discussion boards to get you thinking about your final project, to get you thinking about human rights and policing, and just to get you thinking. And so it's always good to argue and critique against me, argue and critique against your class peers, argue and critique against yourself, challenge your own beliefs. All of us should be challenging each other's beliefs at all the time, stimulating new thoughts, creating new ideas, all to get better and to advance human rights policing in our society. That's how we get better, and we can only do that by challenging each other and getting better. It's never my job to tell you what to think or how to think. It's just to expose you to new ideas so you can arrive at your own conclusions, and hopefully one day you can use the position of power that you have in your life to help implement human rights in any way that you see fit. Thank you very much, and email for anything you need. Take care.